There is a garden, there is a city, and there's a kingdom of God. And it is beautiful, and he is bringing it right now into our midst. And welcome to those who are over in our Life Center. I'm really glad you guys are over there. Hoping you're having a great time of worship with the team over there. And welcome to all of you who are watching by live stream. We're so glad you guys can join us. And as Pastor Aaron mentioned, we are in week number 2 of our new series where we're trying to get some tools to help us think through this thing called evil, pain, and suffering that is a part of all of our journeys. And so the series is Living in Tough Times. And speaking of tough times, whenever you think your winter is going pretty bad, there's always somebody whose winter is worse than yours. Yeah, so it was 17 degrees colder in Minneapolis than it was in the Antarctic. I mean, can you imagine somebody in Minneapolis say, hey, let's do the snowbird thing and let's go to Antarctica to get a little bit of warm temperatures. By the way, the only reason they don't mind that is as soon as the snow is gone, the cold's done, the mosquitoes come out. So they're okay with that kind of temperature. How about this? He opened the door to discover this. Yeah, that's snow. I mean, like the snow was so powerful that literally it created a second door. Maybe I won't get my paper this morning. I don't. And talk about cold. So, I mean, it's one thing not to be able to get your papers, another thing not to be able to use your toilet in the morning. Look how frozen solid that thing is. Just, that's cold. And I really like it when the temperatures are so cold, they don't even have a color to show you how cold it is. They just have to show you the map. Minus 58 degrees. Oh. I think I have one more here. Let's see. Yeah, that's what happens when you forget to close your sunroof, only apparently a snow roof. I'm thinking, why did you even have it open in the first place? But yeah, just when you think your winter's going pretty rough, somebody else has it a little bit rougher. Hey, we are in this series on difficult times. There are so many things we would love to talk about that we don't have time for on a Sunday morning. So this Wednesday, we have another 90 minutes where we're going to unpack a few more ideas and models and try and give you some more help. But you need to register for 2 reasons. One is that'll help us understand what room we need to do this in. And secondly, how many resources we need to prepare for that. So if you're interested, just sign up and let us know. In addition, if it makes it a little bit easier, one of the things we're doing, our Southside Cafe provides some food for folks who have a little bit of tough time getting home and getting supper, so you can just come here and yourself and your kids will have stuff for you. So it should be a really good evening of looking a little more deeply at this topic. Let me use a scripture from Ecclesiastes to set the stage. And a couple of things we're going to talk about today are going to come from Ecclesiastes. But how about this from chapter 8? When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe the labor that is done on earth, people getting no sleep day or night, he's understanding that life is pretty hard, then I saw all that God has done. And then he goes on, no one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it out, this thing called life, this thing called meaning, this thing called purpose, this thing called hard times, this thing called evil. Despite all of our efforts to search these things out, no one can really discover its meanings. I mean, even if the wise claim they know, they cannot really comprehend. what this is a statement about is there are some things that it just takes a whole lot of hard work to even begin to understand. And certainly what we're talking about for these 4 Sundays is one of those areas. In fact, I use an illustration. Are you out there like to put puzzles together? Any puzzlers? Yeah, I'm not one. I don't like those at all. But could you imagine if you have a puzzle and you drop all the pieces on the table, which is what you do, and the first thing you start to do is you start to turn all the pieces over so you can see what they look like, and then you start to look for the boundaries, for the edges, right? Because you always want to put the edges together first. But what if you dumped all the pieces on the table and there were no edges? And what if you dumped all the pieces on the table and they're just like shades of gray and black, and there's some hints and outlines of features? And what if there was no picture on the box to tell you how to put the puzzle together? Now that's a little bit what it feels like when we're talking about these deepest mysteries of life, that of evil and the pain we feel and the suffering that we go through. Now with all of that said, there is indeed some really beautiful help that we can wind up getting. But let's just keep in mind that this is something that is more than a little tough. Here, I have a couple things I'd like to see happen in this series, and for today in particular. It's pretty striking for me how many times I am talking with Christians, and they're realizing, and I'm realizing, that they don't have sufficient real belief in God to get them through the times of suffering. And not only do they not have sufficient real belief, but they also don't have sufficient deep faith. Now, belief and faith are close, but they're a little different. Belief is the objective truth that you need to grab hold of, and faith is that subjective posture, the ways that you engage with those things that you believe are true. You know, belief and faith, when we don't have those in sufficient real and deep ways, when suffering and evil come our way, man, it just knocks us for a loop. And I've seen, this is one of the sadnesses that I have as a pastor, I have seen a number of Christians slowly drift away from their faith because they've gone through times of great difficulty and suffering, and they haven't been able to find sufficient belief or faith to sustain them, to empower them, to guide them during that time, and they just slowly have drifted away. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to talk to a couple of people that they wound up telling me, they used to be real believers in God, but now they just don't believe in God anymore at all. And there's been a few times when I've asked this question. I just wanted to probe a little bit. I said, okay, so I understand that you no longer believe in God. So what have you found to believe in instead that is really making the difference for you? And I have never yet heard an answer. So listen, it's one thing to say, man, this God thing, this God answer is really tough to understand. I'm just not even going to go there anymore. But then to slowly drift away. What are you drifting into? Where are you moving into? Because there are a lot of different answers out there, but as I'm going to try and show you today, those answers just don't satisfy. I'm going to tell you why they don't satisfy. So there's this drifting that goes on. But then here's another dynamic that happens, and that is, I think today in our culture, more than it was 30 years ago, more than 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, there's just so many options. There's so many alternatives. There's so much diversity. I mean, everything's tossed up in the air. We live in a very pluralistic culture. We live in a very relativistic time. I mean, there's no one answer that is better than the others. No one answer any longer claims a privileged position. And so when we're seeing all these different things out there, we get a little more confused and a little more just doubting what we used to believe more firmly, maybe in a couple decades past. So again, we're confused to know even how do we make sense out of the things that are out there. And therefore, one author I read recently, he said, here's a couple of things you can almost guarantee that everybody is going to have in the North American culture. Number one is we're going to do whatever we can to sort of ignore or avoid evil and suffering. We're going to try and put it away from us, out of our minds as we can. Now, by the way, that's a little challenging because the nightly news is filled with that kind of stuff. But we do our best to kind of go to bed, and by the time we wake up in the morning, we have sort of forgotten what the news is all about. We just don't want to spend too much time thinking about it. So therefore, here's the second thing that's almost guaranteed to happen. When it does come our way personally, we are surprised by it, sometimes even shocked by it, a little bit of a disbelief that this is going on, confusion, because since we've been avoiding it, we're not trying to make sense out of it. We're not trying to find a way to go through it. And when it does happen, it catches us completely off guard. And then that leads to the third thing, and the author says, immature responses to the evil that has come our way and the suffering that we are now experiencing. We just have really bad responses that make things worse instead of better. Let me give you 3 snapshots. They're longer stories, but I'm just going to give you the snapshot version of it. One of my epic failures as a pastor, and it's just one. I've had many. But this one happened when I was just young in the ministry, a couple years. And I had an encounter with a husband and wife and their family. At that point, there were two twins, about 2 years old. And the wife had a very serious, aggressive liver cancer. And she had come to faith, a very real faith, very warm faith. Her husband was on the skeptical side. He had not come to faith. But she had found Christ, and it was very, very meaningful. And she fought this cancer. She went out and did experimental treatments. She wound up having some somewhat risky surgeries, and they were doing what they could. Now again, this was a whole bunch of years back when things were much, much less advanced than they are today. And we had our best prayer teams going out there. I mean, these are people that we believed in healing. We anointed her with oil. We prayed with faith. We prayed with fervency. We prayed with expectation. She prayed. She received. And I had to do her service. I had to do her funeral. I had to do her memorial service. And I had questions. I had grief. See, she died full of faith. She died with amazing faith. But she did have one sadness, and that was this, that her husband had not come to faith. And in fact, her suffering had actually sort of pushed him away. And then they had twins, and she wondered what was going to happen to them. Would they have the opportunity to find the faith that she had found when they got older? And I remember I kind of stumbled my way through the service. I cried. I was just so much grief. I didn't know how to process what I was feeling. Snapshot number 2. Some years later, my father, who had been healthy his entire life, in March was diagnosed with pancreatic, liver, and esophageal cancer. Started treatments in April. By August, had realized they found that the treatments weren't helping at all, and decided not to do any more really experimental, risky stuff because he didn't want to put himself or his family through the pains of stuff with so little possibility for returns. And by November, he was dead. Now, I was living out of the area. With Becky and I were living out of the area. My brother was living out of the area. And so we were just kind of trying to get to York as much as we could to help Mom and be with Dad during the time. So Dad died just a couple days before Thanksgiving. And there were normally Thanksgiving, this wonderful time in the Rice household. It's a great meal, so much fun. And with all this that happened, we never even gave a thought to Thanksgiving until, it's going to be Thanksgiving. What are we going to do? Well, we found a diner. And we're in a diner, a couple decades ago, and we're looking around, and nobody looked happy to be there. We weren't happy to be there. And then they brought out the platter of the turkey mesh, and I'm just looking and said, that is so sad. And I kind of laugh a little bit about it, but it was a bleak moment. It was a bleak moment. And one of the things that was just bleak is I was wondering, I wonder, how is Mom going to do? Snapshot number 3. Some years later, I'm with my friend Brian Newman, and he at that time was leading a mission organization in Europe. We had gone to Poland to visit one of the church planting teams, and while we were there, we made a visit to Auschwitz. Now, I've been to several places on planet Earth where I have felt the presence of evil in striking ways, but never more so than at Auschwitz. Every now and then we talk about there's sacred ground, there's holy ground, there's some places where it seems like the boundary between heaven and earth is so porous that heaven is just breaking in, and we feel the presence of heaven and God and all the things that are good and beautiful and true. And by the way, it happens here at Living Word. I just love when it happens. But there are some places where horrific evil has been committed and perpetrated so deeply that it's like it's saturated the soil. It's like it's worked its way into the atmosphere, and there's just this deep, sober awareness and confusion that great evil had been done here by human beings against other human beings. I don't know what to do with that. I could give you 100 snapshots of my journey. You could give me 100 snapshots of your journey. Evil is the problem that we all struggle with. We're all looking for some answers that will satisfy. We're all looking for some help with the mystery. And there are some answers out there that we start to go toward them and they just don't satisfy. What I want to do today, I want to just show you a couple of the other things that are out there, some of the other alternatives that just are not going to help you or I, about the questions we have and the answers we're looking for. And one of those is this thing called atheism, which basically says there's no gods, there's no master, there's no spirit, there's no intelligent designer, there's no soul, there's nothing supernatural, there's no miracles, there's no interventions coming from the outside into this world, there's no afterlife of any sort. Listen, there's nothing. You are the master of your own universe. Now, there can be some more sophisticated or blunt varieties of that, but that's basically what atheism says. However, the number of really hardcore committed atheists, even in the United States, it's still a relatively small percentage. But here's what you will find. You'll find a whole lot more people that are functional atheists. And that is, well, they might believe in God, but they sort of live as if God isn't there. They live as if God really doesn't matter or God doesn't make much difference in their lives. And so it's really not so much an issue of do they believe or not. It's just they're living as if God really doesn't matter. So there's a lot of functional atheism in our culture. These are the two rock stars of atheism in modern culture. Richard Dawkins, he wrote several books, but one is called The God Delusion. Christopher Hitchens, he wrote one called God is Not Great. I mean, these guys are hardcore. They're sort of like evangelists for atheism. They're almost like fundamentalist, militant in their understanding of atheism. They're not nice, they're not kind, they're not polite, they're not respectful. They just are utterly disdainful of religion and all people who might follow any kind of religion. And they say some pretty striking things. I mean, they would actually suggest that kids be taken away from their religious parents and put someplace else where they can get a reasonable upbringing. That's the kind of things that they'll come. That's what I said. They're militant atheists on those things. However, what I do want to say is Dawkins has at least been honest enough to tell us here's what he believes. I mean, it's one thing to criticize religion. It's one thing to criticize Christianity when we say, hey, there is a good God, there is a great God, there is a loving God, there's a powerful God, and there's evil. And we get it that that's a really hard combination. But too often the critics criticize what we believe without offering another meaningful alternative. Well, he does offer an alternative. This is a little complex, so bear with me. This is the hardest part of the message. So Dawkins, in a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, no God, no spirit, no supernatural, there's just materialism. Some people are going to get hurt, and other people are going to get lucky. Some of you are going to get hurt in this world. Some of you are going to get lucky. And you won't find any rhyme or reason in it. There's no justice. Look, thank you for being honest. In a materialist universe that is devoid of a supernatural entity that may have any kind of care for you and I, some get lucky and some don't. Don't even complain about it. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect. If there is, at the bottom, now look at these words, no design because there's no intelligent designer. No purpose because there's no purposeful being creating purpose. There's no evil. There's no other good. In other words, if you get cancer, don't even call the cancer evil. You can't say it's evil because evil and good, they are moral qualities, and morality is just something we invent. Morality is just something we kind of come up with so we can fear. But don't call anything evil or good because that would imply there is design and purpose, and there isn't any. He's being brutally honest. There's nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is. A man said to the universe, "Sir, I exist." We heard that a couple weeks ago if you were here. And there's no answer back. Dawkins can say, DNA, I exist. Dawkins says, don't bother because the DNA doesn't know that you exist. The DNA doesn't care that you exist. It's just pure materialism. There's nothing else out there. And then he goes on and makes this outrageous statement, and we dance to its music. You dance to the reality of blind, pitiless, indifferent DNA. You dance to that. Why in the world would you dance? Dance is a positive thing. Dance is something that has energy. Why don't you just sort of slouch and slug along the ground? Do you want to call that music? Is that music really? And why do you even choose those words? It sounds like if it's music, it's a dirge. If it's music, it's a lament. If it's music, it's just a cacophony of shrill sounds. But he's trying to give some meaning. Let's dance to the music of blind, pitiless, indifferent DNA. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't satisfy me at all. Not one bit. Not for a second. The psalmist says this in Psalm 14. The fool says in his or her heart, there is no God. And by the way, this is not actually a statement about atheism. There's almost no atheists in that time of human history, but what it is a statement about is about functional atheism. The fool says, hey, there's no God that cares, there's no God that knows, there's no justice, there's no judge, there's no rescue, and so I'm just going to kind of have to make my way through life, and that's just foolish, because here's what it means, and I want you to understand this is what the alternative brings you to. You are alone, and you are on your own when evil and suffering happens. And as far as Dawkins is concerned, you can't even call it evil, it just is. Deal with it. Very unsatisfying. Option number 2, hedonism, America's number one preferred religion. And by the way, there are a lot of people who are functional atheists that wound up looking for meaning in hedonism. American Gods, did you see the TV series? I think they're in year 2. Year 2 is supposed to be really, really bad. It's based off of a book by Neil Gaiman. Not Neil Diamond. He's the pop singer. Neil Gaiman is the British fiction writer who has written some pretty amazing books, by the way. And one of the books he wrote was American Gods. And here's what he tried to do. He said, the old gods, Odin and Zeus and Thor and Mercury and all those old gods, people are no longer believing in that. Mother Nature, we no longer believe in. And so all these old sort of spiritual elemental deities, they're fading away because there's no longer anybody to believe in them. But there are new gods that are getting really strong. They're the American gods of technology and the internet and the cloud and hedonism. It's a whole series of American gods. By the way, Tim Keller has written a really, really good book called Counterfeit Gods, where he says, hey, all of these new American gods, there's something really counterfeit and destructive and dangerous about them. But of these gods, hedonism may be the number one preferred God in North America now. I mean, look, very simply, hedonism is this. Hedonism is the pursuit of pleasure. Now, unfortunately, the pursuit of pleasure, which isn't always necessarily a bad thing. I'm going to come back to something in a moment. It becomes, in our culture, above all, this sensual self-indulgence. I mean, we just have thrown away the rule book entirely when it comes to sex. There's like a train wreck of sexuality going on in our culture. There's so much pain. There's so much hurt going on. The philosophy of hedonism actually came around 300 AD. And by the way, hedonism is not a negative term. That's the term, that was one of the preferred terms that they use. But it simply means the pursuit of pleasure is the greatest good in life. So what is the greatest good in life? The answer is, listen, just go out and eat and drink and be as merry as you can, because tomorrow you're going to die. So eat, drink, and be merry. Go out and have a really, really good time. And so what happens is we're doing all of these pursuits of entertainments and distractions and diversions and amusements and trivial pursuits. We're doing all that because we are trying to avoid the realities of life that are sometimes difficult, hard, and painful, and we wind up just avoiding that by pursuing pleasure, by having pleasures to distract and amuse us. Ecclesiastes probably talks about this issue more than any other. Chapter 2. Here's a couple, I'm going to do a little bit of a skim reading. If you have a little time, go and read chapter 2 this week. The author, who apparently had all kinds of resources at his disposal, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. What does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of trees. I made reservoirs, to water my trees. I bought male and female slaves, so basically they could just do whatever I wanted. I had other slaves that were musicians and singers, and I owned more herds and flocks and stuff than anybody else before me. I amassed silver and gold. I had an amazing retirement account. I acquired I acquired a harem as well. The delight of my heart. Verse 10, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. Whatever I saw, I wanted. Whatever I saw, I took. I tried it. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all this, and yet, when I was all done, everything was meaningless. A chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Now, by the way, he goes on a little bit later in the same chapter and says, but by the way, it's not bad to have some pleasures. It's not bad to enjoy some nice things. And they're actually good. Just do it in the context of God and God's will and God's way. And because God wants you to have good things. He wants you to enjoy some things. But when the pursuit of pleasures to distract you from all the real stuff of life, when that becomes your primary way of life, he said, that's just not going to turn out good. I mean, it's going to not turn out good for a couple of reasons. Number one is whatever you try has such a short-lived power to make you happy and such a short-lived power to distract you, and you're up again the next day and you got to go through the same day, and so you just keep on looking for more and more, stronger and stronger, more exotic distractions. Number two is as you are doing that, you're not necessarily thinking about what happens to the other person, and there's all kinds of things we're pursuing for our own pleasure that has damage for others. And number three is when you're spending all of your time trying to be distracted from the real stuff of life, you are losing the opportunities to have a soul and a life and a mind prepared for when life isn't so nice. All that stuff is in Ecclesiastes. So here's the conclusion, though, for a life of hedonism, and so many people find this, is that too, even though you might want to party with all your buddies, at some point just you are alone. You're having to do this on your own. Which is why there's a new one growing in the United States, which once again is a pretty old philosophy. Once again, this one is about 300 BC. It was actually an alternative to hedonism. These things were growing up at the same time. And I'm going to tell you what the Stoics are in a moment, but this is the signature movie for Stoics. Okay, this is a guy's man movie. I mean, these guys are warriors, they're fighters, they are heroic, they're going to battle against all odds, but there's actually some nice stuff about Stoicism. It has values. It has morals. Here's what the Stoic says. Listen, life is hard. Be stronger. Life is difficult. Be tougher. Be sterner. If it's survival of the fittest, then be the fittest you can. If it's a dog-eat-dog world, make sure you're the toughest dog around. Oh, and by the way, don't do dumb stuff. Life is hard. Being dumb makes it harder. And when they talk about dumb stuff, they talk about just not being moral, not being good people, not believing in integrity, not believing in responsibility, not believing in taking care of. I mean, they have a lot of really good values. I've actually read a couple of the Stoic books over the last few weeks, and I mean, I'm reading this stuff and say, wow, that's good, and that's good, and that's good, and that's good. But the whole thing is, be strong. There's a new guy that Jordan Peterson. He's actually kind of he's interesting, but he's kind of like a modern Stoic. He's more than that, but he's kind of a modern Stoic. If there's one person whose voice is resounding through all the hedonistic clutter of our culture, it's Jordan Peterson. And he just winds up talking to, by the way, he gets millions of hits on his videos because he's giving a message that a whole generation and more who have been pursuing hedonism and finding out it's not all it's kicked up to be, he's come along with a different message. And listen, it's time to get your act together. It's time to be responsible. It's time to shape up. It's time to move out of your mom's and dad's basement. It's time to stop being the victim. It's time to stop blaming others. It's time to stop feeling sorry for yourself because none of those things help you. All that does is hurt you. So man up or woman up. And by the way, this message is also becoming pretty attractive to a lot of women. It's not just a guy thing. I tell you, it's very, very appealing for a whole lot of people. But in the end, man up, toughen up, woman up, get strong, be tough, survive. You're alone, and you're on your own. Be strong. I'm going to give you a really different image. That was a fun movie, wasn't it? Remember Mr. Incredible? He's the strongest guy there is. Man, he's strong. He's super strong. Man, stuff he can do with his strength. He was one of the most famous heroes. Man, just legendary exploits. He could beat everybody until there came a point when the evil and suffering that was against him was stronger than he was. And no matter how hard he fought, he couldn't beat the evil. And he comes to this point where he says, I'm not strong enough. I'm just not strong enough. See, that's what happens when you have a message that says, listen, life is hard, just be strong. And you try to be strong, but just say, it is so hard. And listen, sometimes even the superheroes just say, I'm not strong enough. And Christianity has such a different answer. There was one who was strong enough. He was amazingly strong enough. And just one of his many followers said, in this person, I find a new kind of strength. With this person, I can be strong in his strength. With his strength, I can do all things. I can face evil. I can face pain. I can face suffering. Sometimes, in fact, I can even choose to go and embrace some things that normally I would not have, because in him, I am strong enough. Because of him, I am strong enough. Every alternative, and I've only mentioned 3. There's probably about another 7 or 8 I could talk to you about. Every one of them, it boils down to this. There is not a personal presence in the universe that is loving enough or strong enough or near enough to help you. So every other alternative in some way says you're on your own. You're alone. Good luck. But Christianity comes along and says, oh, no, you're not. There is a presence, there's a power, there's a person that is good and great, loving, gentle, here to help. One of the themes we started seeing last week is there's this image of this potter that is shaping our lives. We're going to pick up with a little bit of what we showed you last week, show you some new stuff. I'm going to come back with one final word, then we're going to have some time of worship. Let's watch this video.
Hi, my name is Susie, and I'm a potter. I love working with clay and making things. The Bible reminds us in Isaiah 64 that we are the clay, God is the potter. We are all the work of His hand. God is always at work shaping our lives, often in quiet and imperceptible ways. The first and most important thing the potter must do is center the clay. If the clay isn't centered, the pot will be misshaped. The clay begins to conform to the guidance of my hands. And then there is this moment where it's like a sense of peace comes over the clay. The clay is centered. I can relax my hands and begin to shape and form the pot. Making a beautiful work of art is a labor of love. For the potter, each piece is unique, with its own character that emerges over time. I have to apply consistent, steady pressure to the clay so that it conforms to my hands. Water helps my hands move smoothly over the clay. And now I make a hole in the center of the clay so I can access the interior and work from the inside as well as from the outside. As the pot begins to take shape, I can already see its beauty in my mind's eye. I see it from a distance. It's becoming clear. A transformation is taking place. The lump of clay is beginning to take shape. There's still much forming and shaping to do. Creating a work of art takes the potter's undivided attention. I'm always getting perspective on how the pot is taking shape. It's vital that I keep it centered now. Now I truly begin to see the uniqueness of this piece of art. Its distinct features and lines and character, with its own special purpose.
What would you rather have? A potter who has purpose and design and knows how to get into the crevices of your soul and shape you there and love you and empower you, or blind, pitiless, indifferent DNA? For the next 2 weeks, we're going to do our very best to tell you all about this potter, this one called Jesus Christ, who is great and good and loving and powerful. I've come a long way since then. Since that time when my own grief and sadness and confusion rendered me incapable of being a voice of comfort and hope for a grieving family. Since that bleak Thanksgiving Day. Since that time when I just came face to face with some of the most brutal of humanity ever. I've come a long way since then. Hey, I still don't like putting puzzles together. But this is one I've had to learn how to put together, and so have you. And as I'm putting the pieces together slowly, something amazing happens. Suddenly the puzzle starts to change. You start to see things that weren't there before. Light and life begins to emerge. Because I have learned that I am not strong enough, and I am not smart enough, and I am not good enough, and neither are you. But Jesus is. And so therefore, you and I, we are not alone, and we are never on our own. There is a presence that is here, and that presence will go with you. And for this coming Wednesday night, and for the next 2 Sundays, we're going to do as much as we can to help you get in touch with the one answer, the one person that does satisfy. Hey, pick up a copy of this as you leave. What we wound up doing is instead of looking at the answers that didn't satisfy, we said, hey, let's look at the one that does. And we're launching you on discovery with a guy named the Apostle Paul, who, man, to hear put some pieces together in a really powerful way. So take this and start that journey. So Lord, here we are, and with all of our stuff, and we have tried some of those other answers, and we know they don't satisfy. And what we want to do is we want to, as best we can, Lord, connect with you, the person that satisfies. Love and grace, wisdom and power, goodness and greatness. Jesus, that's you. So thank you that this week you'll be strong enough for all of us. Jesus, may you be strong for each one of us as we go from here. In your name we pray. And everybody said, amen. Guys, have a great week. See you next Sunday.